All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Fiscal or Federal Fiscal Grants Communities of Practice. It is February 15th, 2024. Thank you for joining us. It's just a minute past the hour, and we're going to go ahead and get started for the day. I have started the recording, so really excited that you guys could join us today. There's always so much to talk about in general around education, but we're so glad you could be here today to talk to us regarding how the fiscal elements may be affected by a lot of things going on with the federal level and at the state level. So thank you for joining us today. We are going to start like we normally do with some celebrations and shout outs. So please feel free to chime in the chat. I'm going to pause and we can talk if you guys want to do anything to highlight somebody in your own district or something really exciting that's happening. But then we're going to go straight into the what's on your radar, because February was a little bit slower for all of those wonderful things on the data acquisition calendar, but March is a doozy. So get ready for that. We'll do just a quick recap on January slides because we've gotten a lot of feedback on that. And then we're going to have a history lesson today on the U.S. Department of Ed. And the reason we're going to do that is because it's very directly tied to a lot of the hot topics, news and legislation, and what's happening with the federal budgets and all that. So we're going to talk about, let's lead up to it. So just trust me, you got to trust the process and we'll get you there. And at the end, we're going to talk about, with our little mini professional development, about managing risk, those internal controls. And it all actually ties back to the history and the, what's going on in legislation and how it's all intertwined. But really it has a good purpose today. Just trust the process, and I'm glad to have you along the way. So let's start by some celebrations. I read some great articles recently. I don't know if you guys saw these about this new Idaho playground project. It's super exciting. They're wanting to help renovate playgrounds at a lot of elementary schools. They have some great goals. They're trying to partner with other community members, make things more ADA accessible, which I know you guys always would love to do those things, but it just seems like the money's not there. So this is huge. This could be huge for you guys and your schools. And then something else I wanted to highlight was that it's Love Teaching Week this week, right? So happy Valentine's Day yesterday to anybody and everybody that celebrates that. And then just this whole week, let's celebrate the love of teaching. And, a lot of the folks on this call, you guys are there as maybe in a support role, but make sure you remember what you're supporting. You're supporting these teachers. And so any way you can help them feel the love there is always greatly appreciated. So I just want to pause, take a sip of coffee for everybody. Think about something. You don't have to chime in. Does anybody have anything else in the chat they want to chime in on or otherwise that they're excited about? If so, please feel free to do so. And I'm reminding myself to go ahead and have my chat open so I can see. So anyway, I know you guys have a lot of little things, but it's just overwhelming. So let's go right into what's on your radar, because we have a lot. So we're almost done with February. The last thing on that list was some stuff that's due today. So there's some things happening in child nutrition where they're going to determine some risk, kind of like a risk assessment to see about what they need to look at there. So you'll get notified if they need to talk to you about anything. And then the Gear Up piece that's coming up, that's today. So if these things don't make sense to you, you don't know anything about that, make sure you get on the horn right away and call the person or persons that are in those contact lists. So we're almost done with that for this month, for what's due on that data acquisition calendar. But let's not lose sight of the fact that a lot still happened. That migrant student information reporting is big. And then also yesterday, it's always on Valentine's Day, for special education purposes, and this is more on the programmatic director side, general supervision file review. You will be notified if you've passed the 360-day threshold and what that might mean. So what next actions you might need to take to get back into compliance. So make sure that you are in contact with Debbie Smith and Elisa Fuchs. And you should have been notified yesterday if there's anything to be concerned about. Now let's look at March. March is huge. Oh boy. So, and this is filtered. This is not the complete list. So remember to go to the school finance page, and there's a button there that you can get to the data acquisition calendar. I filtered out school finance this time just to mostly look at federal programs and special ed stuff, because that's what this call is mostly geared towards. But there's some big deals coming up, lots that's due at the early side of the month. If you'll look, you've got quite a few things that you've got to turn in. And then we also have by mid-month some big things that have to do with the charter schools specifically, because we're, believe it or not, getting ready for allocations. And that's what some of the talking today is about how do we estimate all those things. Well, some of those components are derived from some of these things that come in that are due on this data acquisition calendar. So some of that, a lot of it's charter geared, because some of the charter schools, for instance, don't have a school lunch program, and we need to get their low income data. And some of that is just different. Federal funding is usually derived or calculated. It's a standardized federal calculation. All the states have to do it the same way. But it's more driven based off of typically enrollment and low income rates. Whereas, as you guys know, here in the state with your salary-based apportionment, it's that attendance modeling, and it's totally different. But for federal, we have to get that data in so that we can do those calculations. So you guys, I think, got an email yesterday, for instance, from Michelle Pereira. And then you're going to get a separate one from me. And this is really regarding being able to get that data. A lot of it is charter school driven. So if you have any questions, please respond to the person that sent that email, because if you're not sure if it applies to you or not, don't second guess and not have data come in, because you might get shortchanged on your calculations, is what I'm saying. So please keep that in mind. For those certifications, but lots do. So, and you'll see things on this listing in that detailed middle column that it's required. We're not doing these collections for fun, right? Nobody would do that. That's just wrong. So just keep that in mind. These collections, whether it's the lunch eligibility report or Title I or IDEA, when it was that file review, it's all for a reason, to make sure we're in compliance, that everybody gets equitable services out there, and that we can appropriate funding and so on and so forth correctly. And then also, a lot of these things go to the feds. A lot of these data collections we capture at the state level, and they go to the feds. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about some of the things that the U.S. Department of Ed is doing. So don't lose sight of this. This is really just me to nag and remind everybody, don't forget these things are happening this month, because likely if you're on this call, you are involved in some way, shape, or form. Okay, now let's do a quick recap of February. Sorry, not February, of January. Man, I needed my coffee. So school-based Medicaid, we talked about that a lot last month. So school-based Medicaid is difficult. It's difficult, and it's tied to what and how we do things in our state. So what we talked about last month, we talked about kind of the hierarchy of special education funding. So you guys know that IDEA federal grant money is supplemental, right? Most federal grants are supplemental to offset or help to add to and supplement your own programming. So the school-based Medicaid is actually second payer, right? So you have to spend your own special ed money at the state level. You guys know this is maintenance of effort. You guys are basically footing the bill for most of the cost for special education. And then with that, you can do some offsetting of expenses through this Medicaid, school-based Medicaid billing. And so they have special provisions that says, hey, we're number 2 in the hierarchy, okay? We're going to pay before IDEA. So that's why we reiterate all over again that you guys got to have that dialed in. So those staffing costs are contracted services get offset basically by those fee schedules. So it's not going to be reimbursed at your cost. It's off of a fee schedule. So it doesn't matter how much you pay somebody, the feds set a flat rate and say, this is what you can get for this service for this amount of time. It's a fixed service cost rate. But we're going to talk about how you can anticipate those costs and possibly even articulate a little budget for that, right? To anticipate how much funding you might be able to offset for those expenses. And then Medicaid match was the last piece. That's captured in your maintenance of effort, because you have to use state funds to pay it. It has to be state or local funds. You can't use other federal funds. So that's part of that level of effort, helps you meet it. So those were the main things we talked about that. But then we talked about, well, how can the business manager budget for this stuff? Because you guys are running blind. You don't know how many IEPs are going on or what's happening. Well, we said, hey, you guys need to talk. You guys need to talk on a regular basis. I would say at least quarterly. Review the IEP billable services stuff, because with that Medicaid piece, it's not just about what's on all the IEPs. It's, did the family qualify for Medicaid? Did they give consent to bill? There's so many little things that have to happen. So business managers, you are running blind. You got to talk to the special ed director on a regular basis. And you guys got to follow up on non-reimbursed claims. So that's the second piece there, is that the special ed director, whoever's kind of over the billing, so to speak, for Medicaid, they really need to be able to articulate, hey, I just batched a bunch of billing, and so we should be getting another payment in the next month. And then once you get that reimbursement slip, you need to be able to communicate that with the business office so that they know and they can put together an accounts receivable and track it. Did we ever get it? So that they know that they can balance and close out their books for the year, but also just to anticipate if they're on track, because you're going to have a budget for Medicaid, right? And then really monitoring the match. And if you guys do the prepaid, we talked about that prepaid interest, all the, if you put money over in the account over at Health and Welfare so that you can process claims a little quicker, you got to be able to manage that. So you need to be able to have that on your books. So as you use match, you're draining it down, watching to see if you need to send over more funding or not. All right, now what was I saying about a tracking system? We talked about this last month. And this was just a sheet that we got from a district where they were trying to equate, this is fake data here, ABC counseling service, how many days, and these are different line items for different kids, how many hours, and this is tied back to their IEP, but how many hours, days, yearly amounts at these set rates could we qualify to go towards a salary? What building was it from? What team? You could have the student tied in so that you could ask questions. But these are ways you could actually anticipate what you were going to get from funding. So if, like I was saying, the business managers are running blind, but if you do it right at the beginning of the year with your special ed director, who could use their IEP software platform to determine these things and pull out who's Medicaid eligible and who they anticipate billing for, you guys can put together more of an actual budget, anticipated funding, which you can then say, oh, great, that's going to backfill or, offset the costs for this many staff. So it's the best way we can give you high level ways to think about this. And I have reached out to this district, so we're going to try and get some sort of an Excel sheet for you. It is coming. But that's what this was for. And then the second part of that is that you should keep track of the billing. So this same district was trying to highlight, these are kids or whoever that they might have the service hours for dialed in that they should be receiving. And then they want to know if it got billed. And so this is a little bit more articulate, but this would be your biller person keeping track of whether or not they could bill. Well, if the kid was out sick or the staff was out sick, this might be why it wasn't turned in. So those things, just to keep up on why, we anticipated that prior sheet that we'd have this many kids on these IEPs and this many services billed. They're still qualified for Medicaid, right? Yes, in fact, they are. How come we're not billing for it? So that's kind of like a checks and balances internally that you guys could have to make sure that you're keeping up, not just keeping track, but you're keeping up with the billing. We did have a question come in on the chat I wanted to address regarding that. We did touch base on this. I sent out an email last month to try and get you guys a little bit more comfortable with the fact that Health and Welfare knows that there were some delays in some of their payments, and there was a disconnect when the statewide system of accounting that we use, LUMA, as Health and Welfare uses it, Idaho Department of Ed uses it, all these agencies use that, and some of the other subsidiary programs that were feeding it information, that gateway was kind of broken for a while, which means you may or may not have gotten a remit slip to say how much you earned. So if you are still missing claims, like you don't think you actually received them, because this comment is saying that they think that they're still like maybe 6 months behind on getting a payment. please send me an email because I need to follow up with health and welfare on that for you. Because what we're being told is that there was some delay in initially getting those payments out, but that really it was more of a matter of some of the remit slips didn't go out, but the payments did. So what we would want to do is say, okay, special ed director, what kind of payments do you think you're missing? Let's double check with your business office and with health and welfare and make sure you did or didn't, so that we can follow up for you. So please always feel free to chime those things in on these communities of practice, but also feel free to reach out with email directly. But these tracking, you probably have, in your special ed team probably has some sense or tracking that they're already working on. So that's where that communication back to the business office definitely needs to happen. Because if they haven't seen any claims coming in for a while, and they're looking around like, I don't know how to anticipate what we're actually going to have coming in and where we're going to end up at the end of year. That's not good for budgeting. And those folks in the business office are putting together budgets now. So let's recap. The top things on Medicaid last month that we talked about were knowing the student populations, right? Business office doesn't know that, but special ed directors can communicate regularly, stay on top of that billing, and really you got to make sure you're budgeting match and things like that too, and capturing that so that it's part of maintenance of effort when you try not to grow it too much. And you want to make sure you tap back into enough IDEA funding. That's part of that balance. So make sure you don't forget about match, because otherwise that could mean that you raised MOE without possibly needing to if you still have IDEA funds available. Okay. That was a lot. We also talked last month about the GRA and how you guys get to request reimbursement from these federal funds. They are reimbursement, cost reimbursement. Anytime something's rejected back to you, usually it's a slight revision and we'll ask the question directly. So then if you have questions, you can either call us or chime back in so that you know what we're missing. And then we talked about briefly about, well, what are you even comparing to? For the different funding streams, we're actually looking at your application and what you said you're in your budgets to us to request those funds. We have to look at those and say, well, you didn't say you were going to do this. So do we need to do a revision, or am I looking at it wrong? Or you know what? This happens all the time. And that used to happen to me when I was doing claims a long time ago, is that sometimes you're just going a million miles an hour and you attached the wrong thing. So oops, easy fix. But we do look at those. We look to make sure that it's lined up with the budget and it makes sense, it's allowable, all those different things. And we are obviously always looking to see, is it necessary, reasonable, and allocable? Is it something that belongs in title funding? Is it something that belongs in your migrant funding? Those types of things. So if it's not clear to us, we usually have to reach back and ask. So please know that it's not an attack. It's usually that we just need to check our box too and make sure. And if you think about it, we're going to talk about this later on the call, internal controls, we're helping with internal controls here, because as we help look through that, if we find something that we can identify as an allowable, we caught it before your auditor did. So think about it that way. We're trying to help you stay in compliance as well. But at the end of the day, what are these funds for? And we want to make sure that it's necessary to that grant award, because those grants are supplemental, specific to help that one little program. So we want to make sure that the funding goes where it should be, right? That's the whole premise of that. Okay. Now everyone's history lesson that I'm sure you're going to just love. It is very interesting to me, and I hope that you'll follow the process with me, because there's a lot of buzz out there in the media, on the local level, state level, and the federal level, just out there about the Department of Ed and funding, federal funding, all that stuff. And you guys know you need every penny you can get. And I believe that you guys know more than anybody how much this funding can really help you guys. So please keep that in mind as we go through this. Now, I'm not going to read this verbatim, it's more informational for you, but I want to give you kind of some premise about this, that prior to the establishment of a Department of Ed on the federal level, there were a lot of different responsibilities that were just scattered around different federal agencies. But in 1867, that's when they first made a Department of Ed, which was super exciting. But then the very next year, they got demoted to an office, which I thought was hilarious, just the very next year. But over the years after that, there were lots of different levels of changes. I didn't want to highlight too many of them. But basically, it came down to the need for solely a Department of Ed that was just focused on education. Now, different points in times, different big things that happened over history, these historical events really prompted some of the major funding streams that we see through the Department of Ed. And for instance, I put on here World War II. This is when there was a significant expansion for federal support for education. That's when you had the Lanham Act and the impact aids, and they were trying to ease the burden on some of the school districts and whatnot that had these other presences. Then you saw the 1944 GI Bill come out, and they really wanted to help address getting some of those veterans to college. So some of these things just needed administration on, right? They were different things that were necessary to be able to address. It was a priority for the administrations and for Congress. So that's why they needed that department to coordinate all that. Then you had the Cold War. Oh, that's another big one. This is the first example of a real big comprehensive federal education legislation that was like, wow, we really need to put some focus on science and getting science and math and all this stuff we need people coming down the pipeline to get there because this was a big deal, a huge deal, right? So that sparked some growth there. And then we had civil rights. So all these different historical things and Title IX come into play. That civil rights movement, which was an anti-poverty and civil rights together kind of movement, all those things came together and prompted these new funding streams to go with, to start and try and help implement these laws. Then we had Title I right after that, which is another separate focused set of programs to try and help the disadvantaged populations. And many of you guys utilize those funds, and you know how you are qualifying for that and how much that can help your districts because that population has different needs, right? So that's where that came from. Then after that, there was a lot of restructuring, and this is in more of the late 70s. And that's what I call it more of the structure of the U.S. Department of Ed that we know it, that was established in 79. It was kind of this cabinet level department. So they were really more they were trying to do more of the responsibilities to oversee a lot of the actual policies as well behind the funding streams, and really to assure equal access, the equitable access for all Americans. And then under President Carter, that very next year, they split the department because it used to be health and education and welfare, and they split them up separately. And they said, no, we really just need the focus for education to be on education. So that's where that came from. And that restructure really just wanted more attention to be able to be given specifically to that, not so intermixed. And so that was a good thing, according to a lot of people. I thought that was a good move. All right, keep going with me. I know it's history class, right? But in the early years, really that the departmental focus was on administration, as we saw, right? How we have all these things after the war that we want to address, but then we have the civil rights things that we're trying to help enforce these laws and prohibit discrimination and make sure that low-income students have a fair shot at everything too. But over the years, they've really expanded. And they ask for a lot more data. And I hear from people that there's too much control at the top, and they want all this data. But they do this as more of an initiative to promote equity, right? And to develop and implement these national standards and things that they can at least say, here's how everyone else is doing. Where do you compare as a state, right? But then they've also helped facilitate the funding for special education programs and vocational, like voc rehab, those types of things. And the student loans, think about that. That's all still from the education department. So there's a lot that has happened through the years to get to where we are. But I know even when we were talking about the data acquisition calendar earlier, those things, sometimes we have to have that to be able to make sure we can distribute according to those federal calculations on the different funding streams. But also we collect the data to send back up to the feds to say, and here's the populations that we have, and here's how they're doing from performance, all of that to get those statistics for us to all look at that come through like NCES and whatnot. Now we're going to talk about some legislation here. Over the years in the department, and when I say the department, we're talking about the Federal Department of Ed, some of the things that have happened was that Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, came through. Then we also had the Higher Education Act, the No Child Left Behind Act, all these different things that happened. Some of the others were so long ago that many of you may not know who and what administration they came through for or on, but George W. Bush was president when that big push for No Child Left Behind came through, which was actually a lot of funding boost on the federal side. And then the Every Student Succeeds Act was something that came through from the Obama administration. But because of the recession, it didn't look like there was additional funding there. So now I just want to get into some of the controversies and challenges, because we here at the state get a lot of calls, emails, letters, sometimes either criticizing or with some controversy. And you see some of this in the legislation going on that might be being proposed. And there's different groups and advocacy groups and ideals behind a lot of this. But there's a lot of critique about that maybe that top federal level has overreached their authority, and that they really still think it needs to come back to the state and local level. But other people are really still raising concerns about the effectiveness or making sure that it becomes more equitable. So there's all these different things conflicting, right? I just wanted, again, we're in our history lesson. Where did some of this stem from? Well, for a long time, it's not anything really new. There's been different parties at different times, different folks that have led the discussion of thinking they don't need that federal level of Department of Ed. And so I just have a few things here to highlight that even when Reagan was campaigning, he had this pledge to eliminate the Department of Ed, but it didn't have congressional support. So he withdrew and they backed up and said, okay, no appetite for that. Newt Gingrich back in the early 90s also sought to abolish it. In the mid-late 90s, the GOP still was thinking that you guys don't have authority to be involved in like the curriculum or to control the jobs or the marketplace or any of those things. So we don't need the Department of Ed. But as we kind of just talk through some of those different components that were there, it's just possibly a different way of looking at it. So there's funding there to help address the, inequities for low income, right? Or for a lower income population and some of the needs to help bring them up. So all these different things, just different mindsets. But there's even been resolutions to abolish the Department of Education. So I get calls and panics from people sometimes saying, is the whole Department of Ed going away at the state or the federal level? And we'll talk about that. So let's talk about the current appetite. That was kind of historically in the last 20 or 30 years or so, but I know that former President Trump had at least sought to slash the budgets, and he wanted to combine some of the programs into these bigger block grant ideas, but none of the funding was actually axed. So it goes back to Congress and the political appetite. Trump had also tried to reduce just the overall budget. He kept asking for 11 to 14% of proposed cuts, but they actually increased during his presidency in some areas. Former presidential candidate DeSantis said he wanted to get rid of the department. So there's lots of different there's different things coming out in the media. So, but we want to just kind of draw it back into the main question at the bottom that I have here is that could the president cut the budgets or dismantle it? Well, it really just still depends on Congress, because they're the ones passing the budgets, right? Which is where we're going to go next. So no panicking. As you can see over time, it really hasn't happened. Could it potentially? Anything could happen, but we want to make sure that you guys still budget and think that it's going to be there. And then let's just talk about recent years. Recent years, Department of Ed has been involved in a lot of different things about school safety, student loan debt, how do we afford college, those achievement gaps, how do we address those achievement gaps? Some of that's through the title funding, right? The pandemic, they provided a lot of that pandemic money. We can talk about how you guys have used that and where you're at with that when you're doing budgets. But I want to go back to the mission since we did kind of our history lesson, but let's think about Ed, which is the Department of Ed, federal. What was their mission? Their mission is to promote student achievement, right? And global competitiveness. We've got to have people educated to be competitive, right? Even think back to, what we were talking about the Cold War, and they were like, wow, the Soviet Union beat us. We got to get going on this, right? And then also just establishing some policies to try and distribute that and to monitor that we're using those funds appropriately, that they're going to the targeted populations. And really the data, I know those big data collectors, but how else do we compare ourselves or know if we're doing a good job if we have nothing to compare to? So, you may not like it, and nobody does, let's be honest, but that's what those things are there for. But really, the other thing too is just to make sure that there's attention on key issues, right? And the bottom line is to prohibit discrimination and try and have equitable access where we can. That's their mission. All of these are links too, by the way, when this goes out to you guys so that you can read up on this if it's interesting to you. But really, again, the role, they always say the federal role in education is limited. It's all over their page, and it really is. Most education policy is decided at the state and local level. So if you have a question, you might want to just check with your organizations, the state here or your school district, but really most of the stuff is still at the state and local level. Now, this is again off of Ed's page directly. I just completely cut and pasted it. It's primarily the state's responsibility, right? That's why they always say, their funds are just supplemental. You guys are the ones in the trenches at the local level, knowing what you guys need on the local level. So that structure in the education finance in America really does reflect that. And that second paragraph is federal overall is really low, the percentage of funding overall. Now, in your own district, you guys may have a larger percentage of some federal funding, but that still most of it's coming out of the general fund. It's the state and local dollars. That's what's running most of it. There's lots of other little this and that programs besides Department of Ed that you might also receive funding, like through Health and Human Services and whatnot, like the Medicaid funding and whatnot. But just keep all of that in mind. Really, the federal education department is there as supplemental. It is supplemental to what you guys are doing. Just to give you an idea of the structure too, I just have that. It's just interesting if you've never looked at it. Again, this is the federal level. It's right off of the Department of Ed's page. The one I always look at is right smack in the middle is the Office of Inspector General. They have a big role. They play a big role to try and make sure that things are happening the way they need to. So again, this is just kind of for your know-how. If you wonder, how is it structured? Now, all of that was our history lesson. Stay with me, guys. Let's talk about how all of that is going to impact our news and legislation, right? Because there's a lot going on at the state level, but there's a lot going on at the federal level. Okay, so let's talk back again. We talked about this a little bit just a minute ago about the different expansions that have happened over time, possibly due to big events in history. Those biggest expansions that we've seen were under Clinton, George W. Bush, based on different initiatives that they had. And that was that No Child Left Behind. But then K-12 funding actually dropped by 10% in 2007. And guess what that timing was? We were starting that recession, the Great Recession. And despite the Obama administration's push, we need more money for education, it just didn't happen. So cumulatively for a while, that decline was huge. It was 23% by 2013 from the 2006 peak. So just a couple of years, it went And if you guys were in education, you remember that, right? You remember that. I have a link to a really interesting article done by the, not just article, but it was actually research done by the Brookings Institution. It was just interesting. It talks about the tug of war with the different congressional, who was in charge, who had the majority, and how did the funding go. It's just interesting. So you can't just think that this one type of administration means all these things will happen. There's a lot more to it. So if you're interested in that, you can read up more. Now, how about the pending education budgets? What's the political appetite happening right now? Well, you've probably seen in the news and media that they're still negotiating. They're drafting legislation, but they're on continuing resolution number 3. And it's going to expire. The one that's tied to education for ed, it's going to expire on March 8th. So we're getting reports. When I say we, federal programs teams, myself in special education, just the buzz coming out of the Department of Ed. We hear that the overall funding might be less, but we don't know how much. It's really unknown. And when they say less overall, it might be a program that ends up being less that you don't even have. So we can't really guide you. We don't have the crystal ball there, but we do know time's running out and we should be finding out soon. This is a slide exactly from last month, but what can we do? How do those continuing resolutions affect my budget? So you won't have a number because I don't have a number, right? I don't have a number to give you yet, but as soon as I get one, as soon as we find out over here if federal funding is up or down, even if we just say statewide it's down 1%, you'll at least have some sort of information for you, right? But that is going to possibly delay the apportionment to, this is delaying the apportionment to states, delaying how we can advise you guys to do your budget. So you won't have as early of estimates. But what can you do? Remember, I said federal funds are mostly off of enrollment and low income and those types of things. So think about that final question here. Did my enrollment drop? Because 85% of your special education calculation is based on total enrollment. So I know it's different for title and some of the others, but right there, 85% is enrollment. So did mine go down? That might mean my IDEA funds go down. At least you can put those pieces together. Now, again, everybody's asking me, well, how can I budget for federal funds if I don't know what I'm going to get? Well, you can do zero-based budgeting or baseline budgeting, similar to last year. Or if you want to be more conservative, you could just say, I'm just going to budget for 10 to 15% less and hope for the best, but hopefully that's enough cushion. And if I get more money in, great, right? Great. That would be great. Or you could just, a lot of folks are doing this anyway. You're trying to anticipate all your final expenditures. What are my accruals through June, including payroll, all the things we have to do? Should we conservatively pull back on anything else? But the good news is you should still know before you're going to adopt your budget, right? So we should have these in. We're supposed to get these in, right? We're supposed to have these. I've already had my call to say with the feds for special education to say, go ahead and start putting together your statewide budget, Lisa, but just use last year's number for now. But still start working on it, right? The last parts here on the screen is don't forget about ESSER 3. ESSER 3 is ending, right? So will you spend it by June or do you need to budget it next year? What's the goal? Can you actually get that done? Lisa English is out there on the call. Lisa, did you have anything that you wanted to say about this and ESSER 3 funds coming to an end?
No, I think you're hitting it right on the nail there, Lisa, that, if you don't need to budget it for salaries or anything like that for next year, don't. Spend it on needs rather than personnel after June or July, whatever it may be. Just remember after September 30th, no more payroll. So just really be aware of those deadlines coming up.
Yeah, you guys don't have the same type of closeout, right? So it's going to really, you've got to have it planned. And nobody wants to go to their superintendent and say, oh, I didn't draw down money and we lost $50,000, right? So just be prepared to be proactive. And remember that some of the proposed House budgets that had gone through for some of the federal funds, they wanted to not give any title money because they said, well, the districts haven't spent all their ESSER money. Well, you probably have. I don't think that's going to happen, but let's just focus on trying to get those things spent out. Like some of the other ARP, American Rescue Plan money had ended and is gone. Like for IDEA, ARP money is gone. It was gone last September. So these are the last couple buckets of those pandemic funds that are ending. And Lisa English is right. Just get her done. Let's get it spent. We know you need it and you have a plan. So then you don't even have to budget it for next year, right? One less fund. All right, national education recap. How did we get to those continuing resolutions in case you haven't been on prior calls? Really, this stemmed from back in June. Last June, President Biden had to sign into law that Fiscal Responsibility Act and to be able to suspend the debt limit and avoid a governmental default. That's what happened. But in doing that deal, it created some caps for both 24 and 25. So Congress still hasn't settled. We know that, right? They didn't make their October 1st deadline. They passed 3 separate stopgap measures, those continuing resolutions. And we know that 20% of the government is going to run out of funding. And so what's going to happen? Well, there's some on March 1st and the other 80% on March 8th, which we're in for education. Now, deadlines. This was me making this face on another call that I was on. If they can't meet those deadlines, they might adopt another continuing resolution, right? We don't have any control over that. So what are we going to do? We're going to do our best. We're going to do flatline budget or maybe a little conservative, and we'll be ready to adjust that, right? We have to be ready to adjust that the minute that we email out, hey, everybody, great news. We didn't have it cut. So maybe it won't be as bad as you think. That's what we hope we get to tell you, okay? We hope. All right, now let's switch gears and go to the local level. There's a lot happening at the state level here too, right? I have at the top the state funding formula modernization. That's, what's going to happen with that, right? There's some really good things happening in that modernization. So we're watching for that. We'll see how that all washes out and ends up, right? We were also watching the access to the funding that was lost with the swap to enrollment to ADA. That's a tough one, but we're aware of that. And we know that when you guys get less money, that is very, very impactful, right? We also know that we're listening to lots of different proposed things for school vouchers, education savings plans, tax credits, lots of different things coming in there. We're watching about library bills, the big charter overhaul, challenges possibly to the Blaine amendments, arming teachers. So boy, there's all kinds of stuff, right? The list could go way on. The school facilities one, there's a lot of other things being proposed that, yes, if this, that, or the other could still happen too. And that's somewhat normal in legislation. They say, we'll do this if you'll do that. There's a bullying reporting bill, internet age verification, opportunity scholarships. There's lots. Is there anything I'm putting on here? What are you watching? But is there anything you think that we may not be aware of or that you want us to watch or that you would love for us to report back to you on? Because here we are in February, but by next Communities of Practice in March, there might actually be some things that are actually passed. So if you can think of those things, you don't have to do it in the chat. You can email it out too, right? Because we're going to be looking at the things at the end that do get passed or that might be an addendum to something to see if there's something we could report back and say, hey guys, remember when this was passed last year? Well, they passed this other thing that was tied to it that you also need to do, right? There's some legislation pending possibly around restraint and seclusion tweaks, things like that. So we will try and do our best to report those back. But if there's something that you really just, please help me, this is the one I don't understand, please let us know. That's our job. All right, let's do some professional development. We're going to talk about managing risk and internal controls. And a lot of what we just talked about, even the GRA stuff, those are internal controls that we're helping you with by checking to see if things are allowable, right? But let's talk about that. And the very last slide that I'll present will really tie this all back together, I hope, for you all. The history lesson and everything, right? What are our internal controls? Let's just decide what those are together. Here's a great definition. It's all of the processes and procedures that are designed to provide a reasonable assurance that you're achieving the exact objectives related to everything, your operations, your reporting, compliance, and really the intent and premise behind specific funding sources or initiatives that you have, even in your own local levels, right? And then the general standards for internal control, I have it cited here for you at 200.303. But that's where they're really establishing this importance to maintain separation and control over the federal programs. But it doesn't just have to be federal. We're talking mostly federal because this is the federal fiscal grant communities of practice. But internal controls are important to everything you do because they help with fraud and abuse, right? And that's what we're going to talk about here. So 2 CFR 200, our uniform grant guidance. Again, this is federal, but this is really, we need to make sure that there's proper control to, again, back to compliance, achieving the program objectives, and making sure that things go in the right places to get to achieve those objectives. And then I have on the second part of this too, and I can't believe I found a picture of a superhero with a green book, but I'm talking about the green book. GAO's standards for internal controls, right? And their principle 10 talks about how you really need to design and make sure you implement control activities. So do you have the same person that's doing payroll and accounts payable and the bank statements and the budget and everything under the sun? No, you shouldn't. We need internal controls. So assessing risk has a lot to do with checking to see what you have, right? Who is doing what? And section 200.303B really describes what you should be doing. It talks about having clear organizational structural changes, documented policies and procedures so that when your auditor comes in, you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt really easily that you have segregation of duties. No, this person does not balance the bank statements and take the money to the bank that comes in. No. That would be horrible. So all of that goes together. And then another piece to this internal control system is timely corrective action. So if you do have findings from your own CPA auditor or from any other audit or monitoring that you have from the state, you got to timely correct those things so that it makes it it's going to just reduce your risk is what that does, right? So your board should be looking at that too. If they see that and you guys are getting findings, that means there's risk, right? And I have on the risk assessment here that you guys should be doing internal risk assessments and take a look at your controls. If Betty Sue retired and you gave all of the accounts receivable over to Jenny and Jenny's doing the bank statements and you didn't really think about that, whoa, you just broke your own internal controls. So you guys got to look at that on a regular basis, take the appropriate measures. Maybe you got to have a board clerk sign off on the bank statement, something like that. And I always put here, don't forget cybersecurity, because this was one of the very first communities of practice we talked about this. FERPA and student data is so huge and you got to protect it. But what about your fiscal records too? We have had reports and I've seen it happen in this state to several districts in the last couple of years where they got hacked and they didn't have proper backups and they lost everything. And it was really painful to try and put something together to get an audit, which you are required to have to get state school funding. Yeah, you can't get your state money either if you don't have an audit. So really have to think about those things on a very, very regular basis. I always find the best pictures. Yes, the state monitors these things, as you guys know, usually a 4 to 6 year period, depending on the different funding streams. Even if you have perfect everything that comes through on our risk assessment, are you doing timely drawdowns? Do we ever find anything? Do we ever see anything on your CPA audits? When I monitored you last, did you have anything come up? Any of those things. You might come out crystal clear and you're still going to get audited. Right? You still have to, because we have to provide assurances to the federal level that, yep, we do a spot check. We look at not just a spot check every 4 to 6 years as a deeper dive, but we look at your reimbursement claims coming in, right? And we make sure that you guys have policies and procedures for your own internal controls. And something that I see coming through when we're doing monitoring, a big weakness is a lot of people do not have the right policies and procedures. They don't have the right thing dialed down to saying that we have separation of duties. it might be just too vague, and it could allow that scenario where Betty Sue retired and Jenny took it on, and now she can just do what she wants to with all the money because she's balancing the bank statement. So think about that. Remediate the weaknesses. This could go for anything on the programmatic side too. Make sure that different people do your inventory processes, recycle through different people so that you've got a good system of internal controls. And then, yeah, timeout on the segregation of duties. We kind of talked about this, but it's there to prevent fraud, right? We want to reduce errors or the premise of fraud. The premise is super important too, right? Because you don't know who might be a new board member who might have been a prior auditor, right, in their past life, and they have a whole new way of looking at things. Or you don't know who might start showing up to your board meetings, right? You just don't know. There might be some advocacy group, there might be some parent, you don't know. So make sure you're clean, rock solid. You're going to ace your audits and monitorings from us. You're going to feel good when you report back to your board. It'll all just feel better when you know you have those internal controls there. And you'll feel good. Like even if we got hacked, you don't have to pay ransomware. You're just going to restore your data because you have a backup, right? All of those things are so important. Now, just for fun, here's some headlines that we got from a training we went to. School employees sentenced to stealing, embezzlement, pleading guilty in kickback schemes on contracts, things like that. Theft of federal funding. These things do happen. The Office of Inspector General is notified by all kinds of different groups, individuals. When they think it warrants a review, they will be on your doorstep. They will probably let me know they're coming, but they're just going to go show up to your doorstep. So you never want them there, but they do have a good approach to it, right? They're going to go in and they're going to look and they're going to see if it warrants anything. Was there really actually anything there? So they do invaluable service, but just know that these things do happen. They do happen. Okay. Now, this is my last real slide for you guys. Now, I have this boat. It's in a big storm, man. It is in a storm. Now, we are in a perfect storm where a lot of federal funding, like all those American Rescue Plans, ESSER funds, they're coming to an end. And with the predicted zero growth, if not a slight dip, possibly, if we're being conservative, to existing stable federal funding streams like our title money and IDEA and so on, your budgets are going to be affected. It's budget time. Your budgets are going to be affected. Now, you guys know that when less funding is available, federal and state, which you might be taking a hit double there too, could be because of enrollment or other things, but you might have to face cuts. And cuts to anything prompts scrutiny. And scrutiny, as you know, can become very accusatory very quickly. So you guys have to be ready to address that, both programmatic people and fiscal people. You guys are on the same team. We're on the same team batting with you, maybe think of us as a coach to help you out here and there. But really, we know that there are people out there that don't understand maybe the premise of how things work, the inner workings and how this means that and what you have to do here. And you can't spend that money on that, but you guys know that. So you guys have to be ready. Be ready, because you don't know who saw that you did one simple thing that maybe was out of professional development dollars that was raised by your PTA so that you could do a lunch for your employees. And all of a sudden, someone in your community thinks that you're wasting federal dollars on something like that, right? So be ready. Because scrutiny can become accusatory. I know you guys know this, but we want you to know that we know this. So that's why we do these communities of practice. That's why we want to know the history. We want to be able to say, the feds really don't even actually give us that money. So it is valuable to us, but most of the control and most of what we do is from state money. There's all these other little things we do with the federal things that are going to target certain programs and inequities and so on and so forth. Super important to us, but bulk of our budget is state and local, and we're controlling it. You guys are controlling it. So with that, I hope this historical lesson all helped everybody. I know that you probably felt like you're in class, but do we have any questions? We still have 8 minutes. Is there anything burning? Doesn't have to do anything with today. Anybody else have anything that's really on their mind that they think about and they're like, hey, I really want a chance to ask this. You don't have to ask it live. You can email us. Next month, I'll give you a quick peek there. We're going to talk about that form, that tracking form. We're going to try and have some examples of how to fill that in and from different IEP software platforms. And we are going to have a district that's going to actually talk to us about their Medicaid closeout practice for the end of the year. So how do they bring it all together and shift things around and make sure there's no supplanting and all that. And we would welcome your ideas as well. I'm sure we'll have lots of legislative updates. Anybody else? Any questions, concerns, wish lists? Anything you can think of? Send it our way. And you guys are welcome. I'm getting some thank yous. This was good. It felt like I went to class. Yeah, learned something. Don't forget, if you're a business manager, IASBO's next week. I'm sure you guys are going to learn so much there. But you guys, thank you so much for attending today. More fun next time. I'm not sure what we'll teach about, but there will definitely be some breakout sessions coming. So thanks for coming today, and we will see you guys next time on the Communities of Practice. Bye-bye.